The impossible equation. The Galactic Mathematics Summit of 4127 was supposed to be another routine gathering of the galaxy's greatest minds. Representatives from 47 species converged on the neutral station orbiting Kepler 442b, their collective intelligence representing millennia of mathematical evolution. Ambassador Kex Theta of the Vorthan Collective adjusted her crystalline neural enhancers, preparing to present their latest breakthrough in quantum probability calculations. She had no idea that within 3 standard cycles, everything the galaxy understood about logic would be turned upside down by a species that had only achieved faster than light travel a mere century ago. Humans had joined the galactic concordance with all the subtlety of a meteor strike. While most species took centuries to adapt to galactic society, humans had somehow managed to establish trade routes with half the known systems within 50 years. Their ships appeared everywhere, ugly and functional, held together with what they cheerfully called duct tape and prayers. Their mathematics, however, was something else entirely. It was wrong, fundamentally, impossibly wrong. Yet it worked, and that paradox would soon shake the foundations of galactic civilization. The first indication of the anomaly came during a routine verification session. The Zalathi delegation had presented an elegant proof for optimizing energy distribution across multi-star systems. Their equations were beautiful, each symbol flowing into the next with the precision that only a hive mind could achieve. The human observer, a young woman named Lieutenant Maria Rodriguez, had been quietly taking notes in the back. When the EI's presentation concluded, she raised her hand. "Excuse me," she said, her translator struggling with what she was about to say. "Your math is perfect, but have you considered what happens when one of your stars goes nova unexpectedly?" The room fell silent. The Zalathi speaker's 6 eyes blinked in sequence, a sign of confusion. "That is a statistical impossibility within our parameters. The probability is less than 0.001%. Rodriguez shrugged, a distinctly human gesture that several species found disturbing. "Yeah, but what if it does happen anyway? In my experience, the universe doesn't really care about our statistics." What followed was a debate that would be remembered as the beginning of the Great Logical Revolution. The human insisted on introducing what she called chaos factors into the equation. Variables that represented not just unlikely events, but impossible ones. The established mathematicians were horrified. You couldn't just add impossible variables to a proof. It violated every principle of logical construction. But Rodriguez persisted, scribbling equations on her tablet that made several observers physically uncomfortable to look at. She divided by 0 in 3 places, created recursive loops that should have collapsed into paradoxes, and somehow produced a model that not only accounted for stellar nova events, but predicted them with 97% accuracy. When she finished, the room was convinced she had performed some kind of mathematical sorcery. The Vorthan delegation immediately demanded a formal review. Kex Theta herself led the investigation, running the humans' equations through their most advanced quantum processors. The results were disturbing. The math shouldn't work. It violated at least 17 fundamental theorems. Yet when they applied it to historical data, it predicted past events with uncanny accuracy. More troubling, it predicted 3 events that hadn't been previously detected. When they sent probes to investigate, they found exactly what the human math had suggested. A microscopic black hole, a temporal anomaly, and a star that was indeed about to go nova. Word of the incident spread through the summit like wildfire. Other human observers began sharing their own mathematical approaches, each one more impossible than the last. They used something they called gut feelings to adjust constants. They rounded numbers not to the nearest logical decimal but to whatever felt right. They introduced variables for luck, karma, and something called Murphy's Law that suggested anything that could go wrong would go wrong. Dr. Yilan Thos of the ancient Etherian Academy was perhaps the most disturbed. His species had spent 3,000 years perfecting mathematical philosophy. They had reduced the universe to elegant equations that described everything from subatomic particles to galactic clusters. Yet here were humans, barely out of their planetary cradle, solving problems by essentially guessing and somehow getting better results. The crisis came to a head when an emergency message arrived from the Zafrani system. A cascade failure in their solar management grid was causing their 3 suns to destabilize. The greatest minds at the summit immediately began calculating solutions. The Etherians produced a stabilization algorithm that would take 6 months to implement. The Zalathi hive mind generated a perfect solution that required resources the Zephrani didn't have. The humans, represented by Dr. Sarah Chen, who had just arrived at the summit, looked at the data for exactly 30 seconds. "You need to blow up the middle sun," she said calmly. The room erupted. Destroying a star to save a system was madness. It was impossible. Chen was already working, her fingers flying across her tablet. She wasn't calculating in any way the others recognized. She was sketching, drawing diagrams that looked more like abstract art than mathematics. She hummed while she worked, occasionally pausing to mutter things like, "That feels about right," and "Yeah, that'll probably work." Her final proposal was insane. It involved using the system's own mining vessels to create a resonance cascade in the middle star's core, forcing it to go supernova in a controlled manner. The explosion would, according to her chaotic mathematics, create a pressure wave that would stabilize the other 2 stars. She had no proof, no elegant theorems, just a series of interconnected hunches backed by mathematics that made experienced professors weep. With no other immediate options and time running out, the Zephrani accepted the human proposal. The entire summit watched in horrified fascination as mining vessels were repositioned according to Chen's seemingly random patterns. When they fired their mining lasers in sequence, every traditional model predicted catastrophic failure. The humans just watched with what they called fingers crossed. Another concept that defied logical explanation. The middle star exploded exactly as Chen had predicted. The pressure wave rippled outward, and instead of destroying everything, it created a perfect stabilization field around the other 2 stars. The system was saved. The mining vessels, which should have been vaporized, rode the wave like surfers on an ocean, protected by what Chen had called the sweet spot in her calculations. The aftermath was chaos of a different sort. Delegations demanded explanations. How had humans developed this impossible mathematics? Chen's answer only made things worse. They hadn't developed it. They'd always thought this way. Earth, it turned out, was a planet where chaos was the norm. Their weather was unpredictable, their tectonics unstable, their biology so diverse that they had millions of species all competing and cooperating in patterns that defied logical modeling. Humans hadn't developed chaotic mathematics, they'd evolved in it. "You have to understand," Chen explained to a rapidly growing audience. "On Earth, we have a saying, no plan survives contact with the enemy. We learned early that perfect solutions don't exist, so we got really good at imperfect ones. We call it winging it." The concept of winging it would require 3 separate conferences to fully explain to the galactic community. It represented a complete inversion of traditional problem solving. Instead of finding the perfect solution and implementing it, humans found multiple imperfect solutions and switched between them in real time based on something they called vibes. The beautiful chaos. The formation of the Human Logic Study Committee was both inevitable and futile. 47 species contributed their best minds to understand how humans could violate mathematical law and still succeed. The committee's headquarters was established on Nexus Station, a massive structure that had been built using traditional engineering principles. Within 6 months of human advisors arriving, half the station had been retrofitted with what they called percussive maintenance panels, areas specifically designed to be hit when systems malfunctioned. Ambassador Kexatheta found herself leading the committee, a position she had neither sought nor wanted. Her first official act was to interview human engineers, mathematicians, and what they called problem solvers, individuals with no formal training who somehow fixed things through pure intuition. The interviews were maddening. When asked how, they knew their solutions would work. Humans invariably responded with phrases like, "It felt right," or "I had a hunch," or the particularly infuriating, "I don't know, it just made sense." The breakthrough came from an unexpected source. A human janitor named Bob Martinez was cleaning the committee's main conference room when he observed a heated debate about quantum entanglement calculations. The galaxy's finest physicists had been arguing for 3 days about a particular proof. Bob listened for a few minutes, then approached the board. "You're overthinking it," he said, picking up a marker. "Look, if these two particles are connected, and you mess with one here, the other one over there has to react, right? It's like," he paused, thinking, "it's like when my wife is mad at me. I don't need to be in the same room to know, I just know." He drew a simple diagram that looked nothing like proper quantum notation. It involved smiley faces, arrows, and what appeared to be a crude drawing of a sandwich. The physicists were about to dismiss him when Dr. Chen, who had become the unofficial human liaison, ran Bob's diagram through her chaotic mathematics. The result was a simplified quantum entanglement equation that was not only correct but revealed 3 new properties of quantum pairs that had been previously unknown. This incident led to the first formal recognition of what humans called blue-collar genius, the ability of individuals without formal education to solve complex problems through pure intuition and practical experience. The committee discovered that human civilization was full of such individuals: mechanics who could diagnose engine problems by sound alone, farmers who could predict weather patterns by the way clouds felt, cooks who knew exactly when something was ready without any timers or measurements. The real test of human chaos mathematics came during the Zafrani mining disaster of 4128. A deep core mining operation had gone catastrophically wrong, trapping 300 miners beneath 14 kilometers of collapsed tunnel. Traditional rescue calculations suggested it would take 8 months to safely reach them. The miners had 2 weeks of air at most. The human rescue team that arrived didn't even bring calculating equipment. Led by a woman named Captain Joyce, Thompson, whose previous experience consisted entirely of Earth-based mine rescues, they approached the problem with what she called aggressive optimism. Thompson looked at the collapsed mine for less than an hour before announcing her plan. They were going to collapse more of it. The Zafrani officials were horrified. The Galactic Safety Board immediately filed 17 different violations. The mathematical model showed that further collapse would create a cascade that would destroy half the mountain. Thompson's response became legendary. "Yeah, but what if it doesn't?" Her plan was insane by any logical standard. They would create controlled collapses in specific sequences, using the falling rock to create what she called pressure diamonds, stable spaces within the collapse zone. The miners would move through these spaces like stepping stones, guided by what Thompson described as the mountain's rhythm. When asked to provide calculations, she drew a picture of dominoes and said, "It's basically like this, but in reverse and underground and with more explosions." The rescue operation was broadcast across the galaxy. Billions watched as human demolition experts placed charges in patterns that seemed random, but which Thompson insisted were following the rock's grain. The mathematical models predicted failure rates ranging from 98% to 100%. The humans just kept working, occasionally adjusting their plan based on what they called bad vibes from certain areas. When Thompson gave the order to detonate, the committee's monitoring equipment showed impossible readings. The explosions created a cascade, but instead of spreading outward, it curved inward, creating a perfect spiral pattern that left stable tunnels in its wake. The miners were able to walk out through passages that shouldn't have existed, guided by what humans called breadcrumbs, small charges that created just enough light and sound to show the way. All 300 miners survived. When the committee analyzed the rescue, they found that Thompson's plan had violated 43 separate laws of physics. When asked about this, Thompson shrugged and said, "Physics is more like guidelines anyway." This led to the establishment of what became known as the Paradox Protocol. Officially designated as Emergency Response Paradigm 7, it essentially stated that in any crisis where traditional solutions had failed or were inadequate, human chaos mathematics should be employed. The protocol came with a warning label, longer than most planetary constitutions, essentially stating that no one understood how it worked and results were not guaranteed to make sense. The first official implementation of the Paradox Protocol came during the Great Convergence of 4129. A rare alignment of 17 black holes was creating gravitational waves that threatened to tear apart 3 inhabited systems. The Galactic Council had spent 6 months calculating solutions, each more complex than the last. None offered more than a 12% chance of success. The human team, led by Dr. Chen and including Bob the janitor, who had somehow become a crucial advisor, proposed something they called surfing the wave. Instead of trying to stop or redirect the gravitational waves, they suggested that the threatened planets should be moved to ride them like a cosmic current. The math they presented looked like a child's drawing of a spiral, with numbers scattered around it seemingly at random. The operation required precise timing that couldn't be calculated in advance. Instead, humans stationed at key points would make decisions based on what they called feeling the flow. The entire galactic community watched in terrified fascination as planetary thrusters fired not according to any predetermined pattern, but based on individual humans saying things like, "Now feels good," or wait for it, now." Against all probability, all logic, and several fundamental laws of physics, it worked. The planets rode the gravitational waves like surfers, emerging safely on the other side of the convergence. The aftermath saw a fundamental shift in galactic philosophy. The University of Etherian added a course in chaotic problem solving. The Vorthan Collective began incorporating hunches into their neural networks. Even the purely logical machine intelligence of the Synthetic Alliance added a randomness generator to their decision-making processes, though they insisted on calling it a controlled uncertainty module. The transformation wasn't without its critics. The purist mathematical movement argued that accepting human chaos mathematics would lead to the collapse of rational civilization. They pointed to incidents where human solutions had failed spectacularly, like the attempt to fix a climate control system by hitting it with a wrench that resulted in 3 days of snow in a space station. Humans responded that failure was part of the process, something they called learning by doing, or occasionally finding out the hard way. As the galaxy adapted to humanity's impossible mathematics, a strange thing happened. Problems that had been considered unsolvable began to find solutions. The eternal recursion that had plagued computer systems for millennia was solved by a human programmer who introduced intentional errors that somehow canceled each other out. The Paradise paradox of faster-than-light travel was resolved by accepting that ships arrived before they left and just rolling with it. The committee's final report, published in 4130, concluded that human mathematics wasn't really mathematics at all. It was something else. A blend of intuition, experience, and what could only be described as cosmic stubbornness. Humans had looked at a universe full of rules and decided that rules were meant to be bent, if not broken, entirely. They had evolved on a world that constantly tried to kill them, and their response had been to develop a problem-solving method that essentially amounted to organized chaos. Ambassador Kexa Theta, in her closing statement, said something that would be quoted for generations. "We spent millennia trying to understand the universe through logic. Humans understood it by accepting that it doesn't make sense and working with that instead of against it. They have shown us that the most elegant solution isn't always the right one. Sometimes the right solution is the one that works, even if we don't understand why." The Paradox Protocol remains active to this day, a standing reminder that in a universe full of chaos, sometimes the best response is to embrace it. Human mathematics courses are now mandatory in most educational systems, though they come with a warning. Results may vary. Side effects include creative thinking, spontaneous innovation, and a general disregard for impossible. Use with caution, and, somewhere on Nexus Station, Bob Martinez continues his janitorial duties, occasionally solving impossible problems with drawings of sandwiches and smiley faces, proving that in the chaos of human thinking, genius can come from the most unexpected places.